Funding for this video is brought to you by viewers like you. Thank you.
With over 1,000 monsters to choose from in D&D, it can be hard to know which ones to use, and even harder to know how to play them. What weapons do they favor? What tactics would they use? How do they interact with other types of monsters? These are all questions that can come up to DMs that are looking to make their combats more enticing for their players. It's certainly one that I struggle with. That's why I'm back today with another monster breakdown for D&D. Hello again everyone, I'm Bill from AltRoll, and today I'm going to dive into a brief history of a D&D creature, how that history was adapted into 5th edition, and how this lore can help game masters make their combat encounters better. So, whether you're here for the cool lore breakdown or for the combat tactics, I'm hoping to give you a lot more to chew on when it comes to the monsters we face in D&D. For episode 15, let's examine a monstrosity that's the bane of every loot goblin: the Mimic. An original creation for Dungeons & Dragons, the Mimic was first introduced in the AD&D Monster Manual in 1977. Described as subterranean creatures which cannot stand the light of the sun, mimics would take the form of stonework, wooden doors, or chests. This early edition actually featured 2 mimics, a smaller, more intelligent version that could be spoken to and won over with food, and a larger killer mimic, which could not speak and attacked anything nearby. The Creature Catalog 3, released in September of 1985, also featured a metal mimic, which is just a regular mimic that could take the form of metallic objects. These metal mimics also came in 2 forms, but were confusingly opposite to the regular mimic variants. The large metal mimic was considered the intelligent and docile one, whereas the smaller metal mimic was the killer mimic that attacked anything nearby. Dungeon Magazine number 19 also added House Hunters in October of 1989, which were mimics that took the form of a house, inn, or temple, but not much other detail was added for that variant. All types of mimic will excrete a sticky glue from their pseudopod that allows them to adhere to nearby surfaces, helping them to walk on walls and ceilings as they stalk their prey. The Mimic was iconic in AD&D, and subsequent editions added more to the Mimic over time. In 2nd edition, the regular Mimic and Metal Mimic were combined into one, with the base Mimic able to change its pigmentation to match stone as well as metal. Lore was added to the origins of the Mimic, stating they were created by wizards to protect them from treasure hunters. The language some of them speak, outlined as Common Mimic, is actually a corruption of the original language spoken by their wizard creators. Unfortunately for those wizards, mimics make for fickle guardians, and their alignment ranged from true neutral to slightly evil. Space mimics were also added in the Spelljammer appendix of the Monstrous Compendium series in 1990, and The Ruins of Undermountain 2, released in 1994, introduced the Greater Mimic, which could cover a whole room or small building. The House Hunter mimics also made an appearance in the Monstrous Compendium Annual Volume 1 in 1994. 3rd edition is really where we see a regression in the variety of mimics on offer, at least from the base sourcebooks. The Mimic does appear in the 3rd edition Monster Manual, released in 2000, with the Aberration creature type. In this edition, the Mimic's adhesive covers their entire body, causing things that touch the Mimic to be stuck to it. The 2 variants of Small and Large Mimic were merged into one Mimic creature, and its unique language of Common Mimic was changed to Regular Common to allow more adventurers to negotiate with it. 4th edition did bring back some of that Mimic variety, carrying over the Object Mimic while adding the Impersonator Mimic and Mimic Spawn. Impersonator mimics assume the form of a humanoid to devour unsuspecting prey, and absorb all the knowledge and languages their prey had. Mimic spawns, on the other hand, essentially act as little minions that are split off from larger mimics. If left alone for a long enough time, and if they consume enough creatures, they can eventually evolve into an object mimic or even an impersonator mimic. Moving up to 5th edition, we see a return to form for the mimic. In this edition, the mimic is a monstrosity, described as a shape-shifting predator able to take on the form of inanimate objects to lure creatures to their doom. Often taking the form of chests or doors within dungeons, mimics can alter their outward texture to resemble wood, stone, and other basic materials. When in the form of an object, the mimic secretes an adhesive through its skin that helps trap weapons or prey that touch it. This adhesive is absorbed once the mimic reverts to its true form, however. Containing only a predatory intelligence, few mimics evolve enough to be able to speak common or undercommon. Should one reach that point, though, they can be bartered with to allow for safe passage in return for food. While additional sourcebooks did add in mimic variants, such as the juvenile mimic and giant mimic, the 5th edition version pales in comparison to the apex predators that haunted the dungeons of previous editions. The mimic's infamy as a frustratingly fun monster also caused it to be adapted into other media, appearing in the Dungeons & Dragons movie, as well as video games like Baldur's Gate, Final Fantasy, Terraria, and the Dark Souls series. Now that we've examined their lore, let's pivot over to the mimic's stat block to take a look at how they work mechanically. Starting at the top, we have the mimic's size, creature type, and alignment. Size in 5th edition defines the space a creature takes up in combat, with a medium creature taking up a 5 foot by 5 foot square or hex on a battle map. Using the 3.5 edition Dungeon Master's Guide, shown here, mimics can be between 4 to 8 feet tall and weigh between 60 and 500 pounds. Their creature type is monstrosity, with shape changer in parentheses. Monstrosities are monsters in the strictest sense, and serve as a catch-all category for creatures that don't really fit into any other category. Alignment broadly describes a creature's general outlook on the world, and combines their moral beliefs with their attitudes toward society and order. The alignment of the mimic is true neutral, meaning they prefer to steer clear of moral questions and don't take sides, doing whatever seems best at the time. Below that top bar are the rest of the mimic's stats, which are essential for the Dungeon Master to play them in combat. The mimic has an armor class of 12, 9d8 plus 18 hit points, or 58 on average, and a movement speed of 15 feet. Looking at their ability scores, mimics have 17 strength, 12 dexterity, 15 constitution, 5 intelligence, 13 wisdom, and 8 charisma. With 10 being average for an ability score, mimics have high strength, dexterity, constitution, and wisdom, and low intelligence and charisma. For their skills and proficiencies, the mimic has a +5 to stealth, is immune to acid damage, is immune to the prone condition, has dark vision out to 60 feet, has a passive perception of 11, speaks no languages, has a proficiency bonus of +2, has a challenge rating of 2, and awards 450 experience points when killed. In terms of special abilities, the mimic has the shape changer, adhesive, false appearance, and grappler abilities. Shape changer allows the mimic to use its action to polymorph into an object or back to its true form. Adhesive states that while in object form, the mimic adheres to anything that touches it. A huge or smaller creature adhered to the mimic is grappled by it. To break the grapple, creatures must make a DC 13 athletics or acrobatics check, and ability checks to escape the grapple are rolled with disadvantage. False appearance states that while in object form, if the mimic remains motionless, it is indistinguishable from an ordinary object. The grappler ability states the mimic has advantage on attack rolls against any creature grappled by it. In terms of offensive actions, the mimic has a pseudopod attack and a bite attack. The pseudopod attack has a +5 to hit, a reach of 5 feet, deals 1d8 plus 3 bludgeoning damage on a hit, and if the mimic is in object form, the target is subjected to its adhesive trait. The bite attack has a +5 to hit, a reach of 5 feet, and deals 1d8 plus 3 piercing damage and 1d8 acid damage on a hit. Lastly, we have their environment tags. When using digital resources, we can see that mimics are commonly found in urban areas as well as the Underdark. Now that we've gone through and sorted out their stat block, we can begin to relate the mimic's lore and abilities to how we should be using them in combat encounters. Specifically, we're going to look at how they behave, how they would approach a combat situation, and how to get into the mind of a mimic if you want to fight effectively as one. How do we do this? Well, we'll need to take the lore and stat block of the monster and compare that with how that information is intended, referencing tactics and interpretations from The Monsters Know What They're Doing by Keith Amon. Let's start by going through Amon's key assumptions one by one and relating them to the mimic as we go. The first of Amon's assumptions is that most creatures want to survive, and if seriously wounded, will try to flee combat. Exceptions to this rule are fanatics or intelligent beings who believe they'll be hunted down and killed if they do flee. Seriously wounded can be subjective, but we can assume that threshold to roughly be 1/3 of a creature's health. With an average of 58 hit points, 1/3 of that would be rounded to 19. While lowering a mimic to 19 hit points or fewer may make it wish to flee, it's important to remember that it only has a movement speed of 15 feet, making any attempted escape impossible from all but the most encumbered of parties. Most mimics would be aware of their lack of speed, and thus be more willing to fight to the bitter end unless an obvious escape is present for them. Next up, let's look at how their alignment can impact their thinking. On the scale of good to evil, good creatures tend to be friendly to others, whereas evil creatures are hostile to others. On the scale of lawful to chaotic, lawful monsters may try to capture or non-lethally subdue others, whereas chaotic monsters may just kill them. Since mimics are true neutral, we know that their behavior is going to be highly situational. They're going to remain relatively neutral in most situations, and can be more hostile or passive depending on what the situation calls for. Continuing with their mindset, let's dive into some of their mental ability scores. Mimics have an intelligence score of 5. With regards to intelligence scores of 7 or less, Amon states, a creature with intelligence of 7 or less operates purely from instinct. That doesn't mean it uses its features ineffectively, only that it has one preferred modus operandi and isn't going to be able to adjust if it stops working. Not smart enough to possess critical thinking, a mimic truly survives off its hunter instincts, using initial surprise as its only move in trapping and devouring prey. Mimics also have a wisdom score of 13. With regards to wisdom scores of 12 or 13, Amon states, A creature with wisdom of 12 or higher will choose targets carefully, and may even refrain from combat in favor of parley if it recognizes it's outmatched. As part of its natural instincts, a mimic won't blindly engage every creature it finds. It's an opportunistic hunter, and may stay in its object form as tougher characters walk by in order to ambush the squishy wizard or druid specifically. Now that we've set up how they think, let's look at the mimic's physical abilities that influence how they fight. Thinking like a mon, we can assume the following. Creatures with high strength focus on melee combat and won't need to compensate with greater numbers. As such, they won't need to outnumber an enemy to be willing to take a fight. Creatures with high dexterity may prefer to attack with ranged weapons, and if it's intelligent, the creature may lay traps as well. Creatures with high constitution typically have a hit point advantage over their enemies, and because of that, they're less likely to hide in combat since they can soak up a couple attacks before going down. To recap our earlier stat block examination, mimics have high strength, dexterity, and constitution. Comparing this to the assumptions we put forward, we can assume that mimics are strong melee fighters that use their false appearance to launch surprise attacks against their targets, and grapple them with adhesive to make sure they can't get away. The last major premise from Amon is that in D&D 5th edition, unless otherwise specified, any creature gets their full movement, one action, one bonus action, and one reaction, just like any player character does. Amon posits that any creature that exists within the game world will have evolved in accordance with this rule, and it will seek to obtain the best possible result from the action economy of the game. This means they will combine whatever movement, actions, bonus actions, and reactions are available to it for the best possible outcome. While the Mimic doesn't innately have any bonus actions on its stat block, it does have some unique features that grant it advantage and impose disadvantage on their enemies. The Mimic's adhesive feature grapples any creature or object that touches it, with escape checks rolled at disadvantage. Once grappled, the Mimic gains advantage on attack rolls against creatures it is grappling, giving it a greater chance of hitting and critting their foes. Knowing this, a Mimic would innately want to grapple enemies when possible, making it easier to kill and devour them. So, with all of these assumptions laid out and applied to Mimics, what do we now know about how to use them in combat? First, Mimics are ambush predators that use shapeshifting to surprise their prey. They'll position themselves in innocuous but unavoidable positions, such as doorways, small rooms, or hallways. Second, the only tactic in a Mimic's arsenal is its shape-changing ability. While it is wise enough to know when a target is too much for it to handle, it's not able to develop other strategies for engaging opponents, leading to them fighting in a very straightforward, predictable manner. Third, in combat, Mimics use the element of surprise to grapple their targets with the adhesive trait. Once grappled, Mimics will attack with advantage against their target until the prey or the Mimic are destroyed. Fourth, if reduced to 19 hit points or fewer, a Mimic might attempt to flee combat, depending on the situation. Their low movement speed makes running or chasing not viable for the Mimic, and in situations where they can't get away, they'll fight to the bitter end. Fifth, if a Mimic wins a combat encounter, they're likely to just devour their prey as any beast would. This unfortunately means that any adventurers unlucky enough to be killed by the Mimic won't have enough remains to be revivified, meaning a fight with a Mimic can be a literal life or death moment. With that, we come to the end of today's video on the Mimic. An iconic D&D monster, the Mimic has remained in every edition of D&D since its inception, in some form or another. While it may not be as intelligent or nuanced as it once was, it still poses a threat to unaware or unprepared parties. And to many DMs, the mere threat that a chest or door might be a Mimic invokes fear and paranoia in their players. However, what I want to know is, what do you think of the Mimic? Do you like using it as a trap for your Loot Goblin players? Or do you think they've been stripped of too many interesting features over the various editions? You can let me know down in the comment section, or you can discuss it on the Altroll Discord using the link in the description. While on the server, you can pop into our courses that teach the basics of D&D, and if you like what we do, supporting us on our Ko-fi goes a long way in helping us keep Altroll going. However, that's all I had for you. Thank you all for watching, make sure to have a great rest of your day, and I'll see all of you next time.